Hey everybody, how's it going? Andrew here. Just want to give a quick shout out to all of you guys for being such great listeners, but in particular, want to do a special thanks to one listener, Pedro. Thank you so much for reaching out, connecting online, and sharing a lot of valuable feedback. We've taken that information very seriously, and in a lot of ways have already started implementing some of the suggestions you shared with us. So can't thank you enough. And for anyone else who wants to do a small part in a similar way, then all that we ask you to do is write a review. Seriously, whatever platform you're listening on or app, it would mean the world to us if you could just take a few moments and write a review, provide some feedback. I'm sure all of you can understand the importance that feedback has with your games, and the same applies to us. We really want to do our best to improve the quality and everything else that we're doing here on the show, and one way that can be done is if you write a review. So again, can't thank you enough for everything that you have done for us so far and being such great listeners. And with that, let's get right to the show. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about understanding and applying audience needs to your product design. Now, anytime you're looking for opportunities in the game market, understanding your game's audience is a great place to start. Unfortunately, the process isn't usually well-defined, making it hard to understand audiences, let alone how to apply their needs to your product design. So today, we're taking a deeper dive with our guest into exploring this concept of knowing your audience further, discovering key ingredients that you can use to create the right product design for the right audience. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today with us I have Alex Mandryka with us today. Alex, how is it going? And thank you for being on the show today.
Very good. Thank you for having me. I'm great. Glad to have that discussion.
Awesome. Well, so am I. But before we get into it, quick introduction to Alex here. He is a creative strategist and game design consultant for the company Game Whispering Inc., which he's also the owner of. And he's formerly a creative director at Ubisoft and design director at Relic. And on top of all that, Alex, you've been in the industry for like over 20 years. So lots of experience there. And in doing so, you managed over 500 designers and creatives. And a really cool, interesting thing I would love for you to share a little bit about is you studied biology in France too. So share us a little bit about that. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, I've been a gamer since, I was born in the 70s. So I was a gamer when I was very young, like playing on Apple II computers and TRS-80s and all that type of good jazz. And I don't know really why, but I was really interested in the human mind. So I wanted to understand what could be abstracted as a circuit board could actually produce thoughts. So that's why I studied biology. And the very interesting thing is, although it's not really directly related to game design, it really taught me it taught me the basics of psychology, and cognitive science, and also understanding how entities evolve genetically, and how basically from the elements of the cell and the genetic code, a dynamic emerges.
Yeah.
The dynamic of life. And that's very similar to how games work, because games have these cogs and the dynamic emerges from this. And so in a way, it trained me to have that eye of anticipating the dynamic of a system just from the cogs, which I guess participated in making me a good game designer if there's something like this.
Yeah, no, that's such a really interesting story because if you think about it, when you're creating games, you're essentially in a lot of ways, not just the physics of it, but you're creating its own ecosystem in a way, right? So I could see how that could be very relative and such a unique way at looking things. And I think doing so offers a different perspective. So I'm really glad you shared that, because I mean, I didn't know any of that prior to us recording today. I just knew you happen to study biology, but the reasoning behind it and how you can bring those things to what you do now is pretty awesome. So thanks for sharing. And there's another thing that's going to be really awesome, folks. For those of you who are listening today, Alex does have a special offer he's willing to share with just our listeners here on the Indie Game Movement podcast. So please stick around and we will give you some more details about that later. But first and foremost, we want to get into this discussion. But before we do that, we want to go through our Q Box round. So Alex, are you ready for the Q Box round?
That's right.
Let's do it. All right. So first, what's your most inspirational or influential game?
I think for me, as a player and a designer, you have these games that have chess quality, meaning that the possibility space is so wide that there's always an evolving meta. And so I guess for me, I would say Street Fighter is that type of game for me. Another game for me would be it eludes me. Quake and Unreal.
Nice.
The Quake and Unreal series. Yeah.
Excellent. What's your biggest gaming pet peeve?
Yeah. So it's something that you realize when you're working with a lot of different teams, is that for whatever reason, I haven't really pinpointed yet, but people are so passionate when they do games, when they work in games.
Yeah.
You have very intelligent people, and for whatever reason, when it comes to game, you see their brain shuts off, and it's hard for them to differentiate between being a player and being a game maker. And oftentimes they devolve back to being a player, and they just think as a player without thinking from the business perspective or from the technology perspective. And that leads to very silly mistakes, let's say.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one too, but a good point. We kind of get like tunnel vision, if you will, and then sometimes we can't take that step back. So interesting one. Yeah. And last but not least, what game are you playing right now?
So the game I'm playing right now is Kingdom Rush. I've been playing it since the Flash version.
Yeah.
And for me, it also has this kind of like chess quality where I'm playing that game and I'm still playing Hades.
Okay.
So these are the games I'm playing.
Good one. I unfortunately have not yet played Hades, but there will be a time and place when that happens. But glad you are enjoying that along with Kingdom Rush. Well, again, thank you for sharing that about you so we could get to learn a little bit more. But let's get into our discussion here, because I know there's a lot of things we want to explore here and dive deep into. Because, as I mentioned in the intro, where we really want to have an understanding and applying, audience needs, to products, because that is so important. Products being the games, of course. So to kind of kick off this discussion, everyone really talks about kind of the importance of knowing your audience. I know that we here on the show, myself included, have shared this so many times about the importance of really knowing your audience. But in most cases, you'd say that people have a hard time really visualizing, what their audience is outside of, the genres those players might be interested in. So that considered, what would you say is a good starting point for studios or devs to kind of dive in further and really get to know their audience?
So the way I approach that question is that I look at every successful product, games or outside of gaming. And for me, they have to align three things. They have to align what the market wants, what the team is passionate about, and what the team is proficient at. And so I guess my first realization about this was I was flying back from GDC one year, and my neighbor on the plane was watching what's this movie again? Hunger Games. Yeah, he was watching Hunger Games. I'm not the audience for that movie, But I was looking on the side and I was trying to see, okay, that movie, that franchise is usually successful. So they must align what the audience wants and and also deliver what speaks to the audience. And so for me, it like the best way to approach it is to actually train your brain to do reverse engineering on a product that is similar to your product, maybe it's inspiration to your product, and try to see, okay, what are they delivering? What are the objective elements in that game? Maybe it's part of the fantasy, maybe it's some of the features, and then try to see, okay, who is that product marketed towards? So you will see in the trailers, the tone, the type of features that they promote. Are they speaking to the fantasy aspect? Are they talking to the mechanics aspect? Are they talking to maybe some kind of monetization aspect? So look at what is their messaging. Try to imagine who are they speaking to, and how are they speaking to that audience. That already gives you elements of how are they satisfying that audience. And if that game is a reference for you, because maybe you want to do like a kind of offshoot of that type of game, or maybe you target the same audience, look at what that audience consumes, and that's going to allow you to get more informed about what type of needs do that audience have, and what are the features that satisfy the audience. Similarly, I think there's a great way to learn about an audience in terms of needs by seeing what are the games that failed. The games that initially captured that audience imagination, maybe it blew up on the trailers blew up or something. There was a big expectation for that game, but it failed. So now you can see in terms of delivery, okay, there's something on that delivery that was under the expectation bar. So that's how I first approach, try to understand the audience. Look at the successful product that is targeting your audience. Look at how they communicate, what type of talking point they use. So you see what is going to resonate because it speaks to the needs of that audience. But then also look at a similar product, but that failed. And that's going to show you, I call it the flotation line, the quality bar that you need to deliver to satisfy the audience. And you see where the quality bar is.
I really liked how you led in with that like simple breakdown, because sometimes I think when it comes to such a big question, we might quickly overcomplicate and even become overwhelmed with it. But you started out with saying, market interests, like, market demand, all those types of things, the passion that's backing this project, what's the drive? And then also like going to the strengths. Just because you see the demand there and and you have the passion doesn't necessarily mean you have all the strengths, because then we worry about like, oh, this is way out of scope and all these other problems start happening, right? So those three like main ingredients are so good. And then going deeper, like you said, like looking at what that audience, you get a rough picture, a general idea, and then what else do they consume? And I love how you explained too, it goes beyond, we don't always think this way, but it can definitely go beyond the games itself. What are the other interests? What are they consuming? How are they being communicated? And then on top of that, look at the failures. Because if you're only mirroring off of the successes, you're not also then learning about the failures. And when you learn from failure, whether it's your own failure or someone else's, it's going to be a much more valuable experience than if you're just learning off of all the successes. So I really love that approach and how you outlined that. There's so many good things to get from there.
Yeah, it's always best to learn it from someone else's failure. It's less expensive. But,
yes.
But at the core, it's back to my pet peeve. It's really to stop thinking like a fan of games. Try to be cold-minded and rational about why does that work. Back to the Hunger Games, I was like, okay, who does it target? Well, it targets the millennial at the time in this new generation. And I was like, okay, what's on screen? Okay, you have these young, diverse heroes, protagonists, who are the bad guys? The bad guys are the older generation that has control over everything, that destroy the planet. And you can basically see what are the demands of that next generation, how are they perceived, what are the pain points. Like basically, I mean, back in the days, they say, oh yeah, the next generation is entitled and they have all the iPhones and all this. And you can see it in the show. They're pontificating to that audience, and they're actually playing them against each other for their own amusement while they retain all the power. So in a way, art in a way is an allegory of your current pains to let you unravel it. So anyways, in a way, you have to see what works and why does that work, try to reverse engineering. And you're already not a fan or a gamer, you are just analyzing what does that work. That audience is different from me, because the moment you start making a game, you're different from your audience.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's also part of that process of distanciating yourself from who you are as a gamer, and try to analyze why does that work, why this game doesn't work, and try to train your brain to reverse engineer things.
Yeah, no, really great concept. And in light of that too, you did mention something out about, pain points, right? So I want to dive in a little bit deeper, kind of like maybe keeping that on that in line and in thought, because I know like when we go into understanding the process of understanding audience's needs, we know that's really essential to creating that positive experience. So in doing so, and you provided some good ideas and stuff, what are other ways to kind of identify, what those needs are in terms of really satisfying that fulfillment and identifying those pain points? What are other ways we can identify what those pain points are, or improve and increase more value that audience wants?
So I think there's multiple layers to that topic. One is more like as a creative director, like I always go back to Picasso and this painting Guernica. Guernica, if you look at it, I mean, first it's cartoon, right? First it depicts a horrible event where the Spanish army, helped by the German army, basically bombed down a whole village in Spain because they kind of revolted or didn't accept the power in place. And they literally used this terror tactic to also, try to see the effect on civilian population on using that amount of brute force. And the thing is, you must imagine back in the days, this was unheard of, unthinkable. So you're dealing with the unthinkable, but you still know that it existed and it's part of human experience, and that creates so much pain in you because it is unthinkable, but you still know it exists. So it creates that cognitive dissonance. And what that painting did was, in a cartoonish way, they showed you symbols that let you imagine the terror that happened. So, like reality is too harsh for us to see most of the time. If you remember, like back in Vietnam War, the few pictures of villagers running away from Napa bombing, that created so much of a reaction. Like it's hard for us to see the reality as it is if we're not prepared to it. So in that sense, you can see. Well, it's a roundabout answer, but anyways. So you can look at that fantasy level, like as a creative director, and see what are the pain points of current life. Just look at the headlines of websites and magazines, if there's still magazines. But whatever people talk about is already being vetted to target the pain points. I mean, these days we know what the pain points are. Just look at the headlines. Obviously, climate change, equity, all the discourse about oppression. All of this is front of mind.
Right.
And actually, you can see games like Horizon Zero Dawn are talking about this. You can see that actually in the indie sphere, there's a lot of games about that are addressing these games. There's a game that was made, Wasteland Golfing Experience.
Oh, yes, yep.
So like it is. What it's doing is, okay, we have that problem about climate change, but we're unequipped to deal with this. And so I'm going to provide you a fantasy that lets you unravel that question in a fantastic setting. So that's another aspect of it. Actually, I think it might have been the first time I realized this. Back at Ubisoft, it was the time when Call of Duty 4 came out. And Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare, was the first that really became the big global blockbusters. Before, Call of Duty was selling like 1 to 3 million copies each game. And Modern Warfare 1 was the first game that broke the 10 million copies and started the whole phenomenon of people waiting in line until midnight to buy it.
Right, yeah.
This is when it blew up. And then I realized, okay, I look at the delivery of the game, and actually the first opening sequence is that first-person view where you're like the president of some Middle Eastern country that is going through the town as a hostage and is being executed on camera. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Then second, I think it's the third level where you actually go down and you basically attack one of these towns, and you use your night vision goggles, and everything is green. You see the laser sights and the AAA fire and all of this. And I was like, wow, that's reminiscent of something. That was reminiscent of war in Iraq night, like the on CNN.
Yep.
And then I was like, oh yeah, of course. I was just a French guy, recently dropped in Montreal. So I was just trying to understand what was going on. And then I was realizing, wow, imagine the American audience, they send their boys over there in a country that they don't even know how to spell the name of, and they don't really know what it looks like. And what they're shown is this aesthetic. But at the same time, there's a lot of anxiety because they don't really know what's happening. Obviously, people are dying over there. And that game showed up and said, look, you have that pent-up anxiety about this. We're going to let you play it as the hero. So, of course, people line up and say, yeah, I need this because that created so much anxiety for me that's going to be cathartic for me. So that's more at the fantasy level, right? So that's one way to look at it. And then there's the game design aspect of it, or the feature level of it, where you look at games and you say, oh, I really like Zelda games. But the thing is, Zelda games, they come out every 5 to 10 years. And you see these indie games that are recreating Zelda, that are basically feeding into this thirst for Zelda games. They're saying, okay, I'm gonna satisfy that envy.
Yep.
So you have these two levels, right? You have the fantasy level where you try to really understand what is emotionally needed from your audience, and you can see it from the headlines, from what people pay attention to, from the type of messages that people react to. And again, try to reverse engineer why are they interested in this. And you will be able to identify what are the emotional needs that are unmet. And then there's more of a market approach where you see games that come out, maybe games like actually, I'm working on a PvE game, but it was very interesting to see the reaction of the canceling of Overwatch PvE game, PvE mode. For me, it's a data point where I see, okay, so much people gave attention to that Overwatch 2 premise because of the PvE aspect. Now it's been canceled, So it means that there's a lot of people that are thirsty for that experience and they know they won't have it now. So in my book, that would kind of like give you element to predict that there's an unsatisfied need here.
Yeah.
So again, you can look at it from a very top down, like the emotional aspect, or you could look at it from a bottom up aspect of this is the experience they want, this is the type of features they want, are they being satisfied or not? And so that would be my two ways to approach the problem.
Yeah. And I really I know there was a lot of information there, but I liked how you did break this into certain groups, because with for example, let's call it the fantasy emotional group. That one's really cool because like another example I can think of kind of top of mind as you were sharing this was in light of the new series on HBO, which is Last of Us. And if anybody has access to that and is able, definitely check out the ending, because they do a lot. And I'm sure some of you who have played the game can see a lot of the scenes in the show were almost like shot for shot. But what was really interesting, no spoilers here, folks, but the overall theme and then the final message that's delivered is very conflicting and emotional and very driven to the fact of like anybody could be right and wrong with their belief in terms. And that is very emotional. But what's great about what Naughty Dog did with that game too is also on the design and mechanic element. So I think, Alex, you could probably agree with me if you're looking at things in different ways. Yeah, these are two different ways to approach it. But if you can marry let's say the design mechanic element to the fantasy and emotional side of things, then that just puts you in a better position to create a better game or a better experience that really fulfills your audience needs.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, Last of Us was also something that I really studied, because at one point I was looking at zombie games. And obviously they were not only games, but zombie media in general was very, very prominent. Like a lot of people are putting their attention to it. And I was wondering, okay, trying to reverse engineering why. And actually Last of Us was one of these where when you looked at the trailer, the launch trailers, the messaging was, so I think it was Ellie that was talking to Joe and saying, okay, what he taught me was either you stick to your principles and die, or you do whatever it takes to survive, and then you have a chance.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because this is the typical, post-apocalyptic meme.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, you have to let go of all your morals. But actually, when you look at the game itself, that's actually not at all what the game is about. In my opinion, what the game is about is, for love, you will do things that you never thought you would be capable of.
Yeah.
Including lying to them, like not spoiling anything. But
yep.
And so in a way, that's also part of the formula of saying, I'm going to hook you with what you want to hear. But in the game, I'm going to deliver what you need to hear.
Yeah.
To unlock that emotional need. So there's also like layers to it. Mm-hmm. Like I hook you in with what you want to hear, but to have, to turn a game into an IP, you have to hit them emotionally and in a transformative way.
Yeah.
And so hook them with what they need to hear, but you deliver what they want to hear, but you hit them with what they need to hear to target that emotional knot that they have, they cannot resolve. And that's what's going to transform your game into an IP. Yeah.
Thank you for providing that breakdown, because I think that provided just another great example in terms of how these two things can happen and how it's hard to do, but if you have that focus or in that intent, especially as Naughty Dog's pretty much known for having more of a cinematic approach to a lot of their titles. But in general, if you have that idea behind it backing, it's just going to lead you on a better path to accomplish those types of things, especially if that's the type of game you want to make. But it could be applied in lots of different ways. Now, we talked a lot about different information, and I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about how some of this information can be interpreted. Because sometimes, let's say if we're having like, play tests being done or just opinions from other people, we could take this as like valuable feedback, but it might, depending on how we apply it, it might send the game's vision off course. So what would you say are maybe a couple of good things to differentiate audience's needs and wants so the project stays on course? Because sometimes what a audience or a player wants isn't really going to be the game that's being made. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's I think especially when you're talking about fantasy aspects or emotional aspects, that's probably one of the things, one of the areas where the conscious brain is the weakest to express itself.
Mm.
So you really have to, hear what your audience or your playtest participants say, but then you really have to. I mean, in terms of fantasy, I would never take that for face value.
Mm.
I would always try to understand. Okay, why are they saying what they're saying? What is their perspective? Like in in general, it's going to inform you on their perspective. And that's more valuable than their conclusion. Because again, back to the notion of you come in because you hear what you want to hear. But what's really going to add value is if I deliver what you need to hear. And you need to hear, back to the Guernica aspect, the Guernica example. It was unspeakable. It was unthinkable. So your job as, let's say, a big word, an artist, in my opinion, is to deliver the material that's going to help your audience transform. That's going to, untie the knot. They are not really able to express what's in the knot, because if they were, there would not be a knot.
Right.
So, from a fantasy standpoint, what you should really be focusing on is why are they saying what they're saying? Not so much what are they saying, so I need to act on it and transform my content.
Right.
Because they're saying something, maybe they're saying something, they're expressing about an expectation. I wish it was about this. And so instead of delivering what they say they wish it would be, it would inform you about what the pain point is, in a way. So yeah, it's kind of like a roundabout way to talk about it.
Yeah, but it's interesting too, because approaching it that way, instead of just simply applying information, trying to ask yourself, well, what is causing that to say that? And you ended there really well as saying it's a pain point. And that's a thing. I think too, in part of our discussion, when we're trying to figure out audience's needs, and again, everybody's like, look for pain points and everything, and then address those pain points. But pain points, some of them can be used as a filter. And I think your example totally just provided that as a sense. If a player has a pain point because the theme isn't on with them, or let's say a mechanic they would like to be able to dodge or block, and you didn't put that in the game for specific reasons, then maybe that's not that player, or maybe a bunch of players, maybe they're not the right audience. So that pain point doesn't mean address it. It just might mean, okay, we might need to shift our focus then, and this is very revealing.
So it made me think of something, like the blocking example, or the dodging like a feature.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, the reason they would be expressing this is because your aesthetic, the way you present the game, set expectations that led them to actually want that type of feature.
Interesting.
So oftentimes in that type of situation, it would be unwise to try to address the fact that they want that feature, instead of saying, let's go back to the way we present our fantasy, and then make sure that we set the right expectations so they don't even think about blocking. We worked on Space Marine at Relic. And the whole, I mean, obviously you're like Warhammer 40K, you're the Space Marine, super macho, super like fearless. And so what we, like the mantra of the game was cover is for the weak. And it was funny because like in terms of development, they basically took all the features from Gears of War,
Okay.
which is a game based around cover.
Yeah.
And they said cover is for the weak. So on one end, it was their differentiating factor.
Yeah.
But the problem is there was no game dynamic that said, let's push forward all the time. So you needed defense, you needed cover. And so on one end, we are always trying to play catch up with that problem up until we said, okay, we implemented a game system that said you can only regenerate health if you do a finishing move, which was a couple months before Doom, the new Doom. So I haven't been able to talk to the Doom guys to know if they were taking inspiration, but it's similar. Like, like in a way, if I create the game dynamic and actually tutorialize it to say, you need to move forward, this is how you win the game, then people are not going to be thinking about blocking or dodging because all the game is telling me, move forward, execute enemies, go in the midst of the battle. Right? So in that sense, it's about like if a player through a playtest expresses something that is completely left field to what your intentions are, what it means is that the aesthetics that you push didn't communicate your intentions correctly, and so the expectations of the player were shifted. And so it's not about addressing what they're saying. What they're saying is telling you, you didn't present your fantasy in a way that framed the player in the right mindset.
I absolutely love that example because, I mean, there's so much from a marketing perspective that aligns all the way down into the actual game experience, which I know I've talked a lot about here on the show about, kind of the user, the player journey. And in that example too, like think of how simple that is, but how multifaceted, how layered it was. Like cover means weakness, right? Like you said, it was like, I couldn't quote you verbatim there, but 3 simple words that really define that expectation. That's also clearly not necessarily a poke, but like, again, defining expectations around the time when Gears of War was popular. I mean, just those 3 words are addressing so many things in terms of fulfillment of audience, the needs of particular audience members, and then going further in terms of what you were talking about with the design and mechanic aspect with the tutorial, which I'm sure, I'm not familiar with the game, but just as sure was more experiential than like, hey, move up to, And again, it was showing like it's not so much about the gameplay aspect, but outlining what the expectations by this is how you're going to succeed. We clearly play games for to succeed at them, to be rewarded by what we're doing, and that's what it outlined. So then anything else in terms of, well, a player that was more in line with coverage within that whole messaging all the way down to the experience at the very forefront, they could quickly identify whether this game's not for me because I'm not the right fit, or wow, this is really cool, something different. But at the very front for it, I mean, again, that whole process that you outlined really sets those expectations and addressing that particular audience's needs.
And just as a side note, in these examples, like Space Marine, but I think you have to pay homage to Doom because it's way stronger franchise and everything. If you look at Doom, which had similar dynamics in terms of the gameplay loop, the way you win at Doom is that you need to move in the heat of battle. You need to be in the center of the arena to regenerate your health and get ammo drops and all this, because you do that finishing move, which is actually the opposite of the regular strategy of a shooter. In a shooter, you basically want to minimize the angle of engagement to make sure, if your angle of engagement is 360, it means you're surrounded. You never want to be surrounded in real life. But Doom, what they did is They said, no, the moment you win is to be surrounded. So not only it supported the fantasy of you're going to be hell's biggest nightmare, but also it changed the gameplay completely because now you're playing it in a completely different way. So it also became your gameplay differentiator, which is obviously something you pay attention to when you're thinking of your game and market your game. So this is when everything coalesces, and yeah, then the identity of your game is clear. The frame of mind when I'm playing is clear. Even it's easy to inspire the artist. You know, if you look at the box art, Doom guy's in the middle of hell and he doesn't care.
Yeah.
So yeah, it becomes the inspiration not only for the player but for the team and for marketing communication. That's what creates a solid experience.
Yeah. No, I love that example too, because you're right. It really caters to kind of like, again, going back to what you said about those two areas to really further identify design, mechanic, like what are the features, but also taking that fantasy and emotional aspect and marrying the two. And it's such a good way to think of things because, again, I think it goes back into kind of the pet peeve that you mentioned and other factors where we're not necessarily putting all these elements together, but they're all very related in terms of creating that experience and addressing needs. So I want to go into something else a little bit quickly here as we're approaching time and talk about kind of like a little bit with product design and creating the right recipe, because I know this is an area you really know a lot about. So by understanding an audience, like we've discussed, it can really help create a great product design. But I'm also wondering too, when I'm thinking at least, it probably isn't the only key ingredient. It's a big component, obviously, but maybe not the only ingredient. What would you say are other factors or ingredients studios and devs should consider when they're creating that right recipe for a product design?
Yeah, so that's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
And so in a way, this is where you close the loop between what the audience wants, which is obviously all these needs and the pain points. What the team is passionate about is more about the fantasy. What the team is good at is going to be the features.
Yeah.
So when you look at, the market you're in, you look at the reference games, you look at the success case, you look at the failure case, and you try to, you start to realize, okay, these are this is the quality bar, and this is the type of features that you need. Like for example, at one point we're making for a client, we're working on an RTS game. And when we break down the RTS market, we realize, okay, there's like the AAA type, like StarCraft, these games, they do everything. So you don't really want to look at them, especially if you're indie. But you realize, okay, you have more like the hero RTSs. Like, for example, Deserts of Karak is more what we call what we called at that point a hero RTS. So you have a campaign, you have a strong voiceover, you have cinematics, you have very bare bone multiplayer, you have very bare bone game systems, although they're my friends, but if you look at them, they are not that deep in terms of game systems. There was even bugs, but it was okay because the audience, they want that experience. So what they need is the cinematics. Music is a big component. Visuals are a big component. And some components are not that important. Like multiplayer, it's not that important. The depth of gameplay, actually not that important, even though they say it is in the trailers, because no one wants to be playing a game that they say, oh, game systems are broken. No, you want to still think that you are playing a deep game, although the audience doesn't really need it. But if you look at in RTSs, you also have like skirmish type games, like sandbox games or city builders or 4X, like for example, a 4X game.
Yep.
4X games, like if you look at the different elements, you don't need cinematics. You don't really need voiceovers. You need the good music. Actually, you need the good music because you'll be spending a lot of time playing that game. So you need a good music. But it's almost like, like if you think of a pen and paper RPG game, you have a certain amount of competence points. You have to distribute them around your different attributes. As a game team, a dev team, you also have a limited budget of how much effort you could distribute on these different elements.
Right.
And also you have multiplying factors because you have skills. So if you're very good with engineering and you're very good with AI, well, the points you put in AI are going to be multiplied.
Right.
This is your unfair advantage. So what you need to do is you look at the different sub-segments of a market. You look at what is the required distribution of these attribute points between different segments of your game. And you see, okay, what are we good at? So meaning what our time is going to get us in terms of quality and features. And you're going to make sure that within your category, you score above the quality bar that's required, but also you play on your strength. So let's say, imagine you're a team that has great art, great animators. Maybe a 4X game is not the game you should make because your skills are not going to be leveraged into the content. But to do a cinematic driven, like campaign type RTS is going to be good for you because you could put all your time multiplier, effort multiplier into cinematics and storytelling and all of this. So in a way, back to your question, when you analyze what the audience wants and what the quality bar is needed across the different features, think of what are we good at? Where is our effort going to pay off the best? And this is how you basically build your game recipe and you say, okay, we are confident that we can deliver great animation. We're confident that we can deliver great multiplayer. Is there an audience that wants both of these things? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's not the right mix. But if you have great multiplayer, great AI, great game design, well, it fits in that category of the skirmish type games or 4X type games. So this is where you realize, okay, these are the sub-segments of your market. What are the bouquet of features that is needed? And can we have a realistic shot at building that level of quality on the different features based on what we know our skills are? Again, sorry for the...
No need to apologize. I mean, honestly, it's great because identifying these right ingredients really goes back into what you led with, especially that final point. We just to reiterate, we talked about, the market demands, interests, the passion, all two really great things, but then it's really coming down to the strengths that it sounds like it's that one ingredient. I'm trying to think of one like from a basic recipe, but it's not coming to mind, but it's the one ingredient that really makes that recipe, that holds it together. Because, passion, let's face it, we all have some form of passion for whatever. Like it's a common commodity. It's nothing sparse. The market demand, that can vary too, but the strengths, I mean, playing to those and really finding a way to mirror everything, that's what holds it together. Because as I think outlined before, if you're not playing to your strengths and trying to do something else, that could easily have things fall apart, cost more resources, all these other things that can lead into problems, down the road. But really finding those strengths and trying to find, and then playing to the strengths, and then also then with that lens, looking at the market demand now, looking at, because the passion's always there, we said, but then looking at the demand and then finding what those needs are. So I really like that process of what are the strengths and then moving forward with the demand. Because I know sometimes we might look at genres that are really popular, but I mean, one of the most popular high in demand is 4X. But to your point, if you're strictly all about visuals, maybe a 4X isn't good, but in that line, an RTS might be a better alternative to consider, especially if it plays to your strengths. So. Yeah.
Especially as an indie dev, because, for me, the big difference between like mainstream and indie is that mainstream, they have big budgets and they're going to try to cater for the common denominator of the audience.
Yep.
Which is why you have like watered down experiences and not as juicy as an indie game can be. And so as an indie developer, what you need to do is you really, in general, there will be taking risks to try to capture a niche that really wants what cannot be delivered by the mainstream targeted products.
Yep.
So, you talk about permadeath type situations or like but so that's where you need to make sure that you have the right skills to deliver that and put your energy there. So yeah, some elements can be a bit below bar, but that doesn't matter because you're the only product that is going to take these type of risks and is going to be able to deliver that experience, which no other game is going to be able to. So this is where, you need to pick your battles and find a battle that you have the most chances to win yourself and that no one else is daring to take on.
I love it. It's it's such a great way to close. Not adding anything to that, folks. So, like I said, Alex, I can't thank you enough. But before we get closing, are there any tips, suggestions, like that you would share with people based on what we discussed, even if it summarizes, things? What are like a few tips that you would share?
So one thing is actually, read business books.
I am so happy you said that because it's been top of mind for me lately. And anyways, I'll let you keep going. Sorry. Read business books. Yeah. Keep going.
So one book that I lended to someone and never returned it, so I can show it to you. It's The Innovator's Dilemma.
Oh, okay.
That's a very good book that basically, I think it's Christensen that wrote it. He basically studied all the different companies and how they innovated and what makes an innovative company sustain itself. Basically thinking of IBM. Yeah, IBM were the big boys in computers, but they stayed with the mainframes. And when someone showed up with a desktop, they said, no, because, innovation in general is lower quality.
Yep.
So the first desktop could not compete with the mainframes. And they said, all of our clients we're doing billions of dollars with the mainframes. Who cares about that new market that's not going to even move the needle? And so they got taken over by Compaq, and then, like all of it, the cycle goes on and on, right? Yep. And same with like Kodak. Kodak were the best with films.
Yes.
And, and when digital camera came and said, who cares? We don't care. Because the big company, they have their value structure there, right?
Yeah.
So it just shows you like how innovation works. And I think it in the video games, but especially in indie market, innovation is what drives the thing. So I think that's one good thing. And another one that I have here that I would recommend is that book called, you can see it, but Value Proposition Design. It's basically a bunch of processes and techniques, like workshops. It's a very fun book to read.
It looks like it. Yeah. So what Alex is showing is it's very visually oriented. Like you would think that something with the title of Value Proposition Design is very text rich. I've never seen a business book ever like this before from what he shared.
And it gives you a lot of these tools to interview your customers, analyze what are the pain points, what are the value the value gains and all of this. And the thing is, it's gonna give you a framework, and then to start, try to analyze, reverse engineer, why is that game successful? Who is it targeted towards? Train yourself to look at trailers and say, stop the excitement and the giddiness about that new game and say, what are the message points that game is conveying? Who is that targeted to? So learn to take a step back from your excited gamer mind and say, wait a minute, why am I excited? What is it communicating to me? Who else is excited? Look at the response, look at the comments on the trailers, look at the community on Reddit. What are they talking about? And so, I think that's the biggest thing. Take a step back from your passion as a gamer and try to see, why is that game successful? Why is that game unsuccessful? And one way, the way I had to get there was basically to read these business books.
No, great point. And I'm going to add a bonus to that list. I don't think as focused as I think the two books you mentioned, but applies things in similar manner. Jim Collins, Good to Great. It's about corporations and everything, but basically the process he went through was over a 15-year time period was let's evaluate all these companies that had exponential growth over that 15-year period. And out of all the companies that were in operation, and some of them that he evaluated aren't operational today, but based off of that criteria, only 11 checked off his very, very lengthy list on what made them great. So very broad, but if you can look at those principles and apply them to your games, your business, lots of cool things there. So Good to Great, another one. But no, I have to check these out. All right. Anything else? So business books, anything else? And if not, that's cool too. That there was so much in what you just shared. So
I think, similar to what I said about what is that game successful, try to pay attention to what's the zeitgeist, what is in people front of mind, and what does that say? There's something like one example that I give is, back to this alignment about what the people need, what the passion and what the delivery is. Mm-hmm. I always look about the example, like two very polarizing examples. If you look at, I used to look at the presidential election because the elected president found that alignment between what the need was, the messaging, and the delivery.
Yep.
And so I did this, back when I was studying Call of Duty Modern Warfare, I analyzed the Obama election and how he presented and what was the social environment and all this. But you can do the same with I didn't do it for Biden, but I did it for Trump. What he said was, okay, let's make America great again, whatever you think about it. That doesn't matter. Again, take a seat back and just look at why did it work? What's the pain point of the people that resonated with that message? Basically, you could look at the fact that, America hegemony is running out. There's a shift of power on top of the fact that climate is changing. Like it was the first generation where the children would have less good of a life than the previous one. Like the American dream kind of ran out. Mm-hmm. So that's the anxiety. Okay, my children are going to have a worse life than I did. Then one of the response for one demographic was, I'm going to bring you to the past. Let's make America great again. Now, the same pain point also applied to a different audience, let's say more West Coast, more coastal audience. And whose message is talking to these people? I think that's Elon Musk, because Elon Musk says, okay, you're afraid about the future. My solution is not going to go to the past. My solution is science. Let's go to Mars. These people are icons. I'm not saying one is better than the other, or probably some people think that both are horrible. That's not my point. My point is to say their message captures people's imagination. Who is it? And what is that message answering the pain point of?
Yeah.
And so, I guess that's another way to formulate what I said before.
Yeah, no, it's such a great one too, because, how are you going about capturing people's attention? And yes, there's lots of different ways, strategies, tactics to do that. But in messaging at its core, regardless if it's visual or textual, how are you capturing their attention? And how is that being done in terms of addressing a pain point or relatable or aligning with that audience? So I think those are really great examples, because even though they're totally applicable, because they're much broader and much more challenging. I mean, there's tons of people that are working with these people that you mentioned that are really trying to figure out what it is. And again, like make America great again. I mean, that's like what? How many words? 4? But again, it takes a lot of work to get to that point. But at the same time, Yeah. What is that messaging? Really know that, see what it's successful, and reverse engineer. How does that apply? So really great stuff there. All right. Well, unfortunately, we've come to time, but man, I mean, I'm sure we could go on for hours here. So many interesting things. But I'm glad that you dove deep on these topics and everything else. But before we have you, give us like how to contact you, how to get in touch and everything. Let's hear what that offer is that I said that you had. What is this offer that you're willing to share with our listeners?
Well, it's really simple. Usually I work with like mid-sized type companies, like, the triple I, like the Techlands of this world and this type of companies. But for your audience, I mean, I'm always all about like building from the ground up, and I really like to work with passionate people. So my offer is really simple. Reach out to me at alex@gamewhispering.com and add Indie Game Movement in the title. And if you want to discuss, and if you want my help, I'll give you a friends and family discount.
Wow,
that's easy.
Thank you so much. And I hope at least today, folks, with everything that Alex shared with us, that this could be something that could be really worthwhile for you. I don't see why it couldn't, but at the very least, he's very generous to offer that discount to you guys. So if you're interested, definitely email him. Or what are other ways to get into contact? Do you have a website? Do you use anything else like social media? What else?
Yeah, you can. The best way to find me is on gamewhispering.com, my website. I think that's the best because I try to stay away from social media myself. So I'm glad that you're doing that work for me. That's great.
Excellent. So, like Alex said, check out the website, gamewhispering.com. There's a lot of other great, helpful information there. Lots of other services, things like that cover some of the things that we talked about, but also a lot of other cool areas too. So please check out Alex's site. There's a lot, I think, that you can get out of it and a lot of value there. So again, Alex, I can't thank you enough for being here today with us. It was such a great time having you on the show and learning a little bit more about audience needs. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew, for the invitation.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saab for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.